بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وبعد. In Islam, different things hold different virtues. One is my lifestyle. It's virtuous to live a healthy lifestyle. We learn from the hadith, what you eat should be halalan tayyiba. It should be lawful, but at the same time, it should be wholesome. Our dress code, we should be dressed modestly. My living should be within my means. There's a virtue attached to many things in our lives, to the point that even days have particular virtues, months have particular virtues, and years have particular virtues. And in our case, for our conversation, we have the particular occasion of Muharram, which is auspicious in Islam, and more particularly, the fast or the day of Ashoora has added significance. So we need to think about the day of Ashoora as well as the month of Muharram as part of a broader scheme in Islam where there are virtues attached to different things. And Allah does this to keep the Muslim busy. So the year begins, I will have the occasion to fast in the month of Muharram. And then Ramadan will come. And then Eid will come. And then you'll have the days of Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah. Throughout the year, Allah spread different occasions, different actions that we can do as a motivation to get through the year. It's common sense that when I see the end of the tunnel, it's easier for me to get to there. But if the travel and the journey is so long with no end in sight, it becomes very difficult to move forward. So if I, throughout the year, have no motivation, then I drag my feet as I go through the year. But I have in Islam certain points that I could look at. Yes, Muharram is the month that's very virtuous. I'm going to mark it on my calendar. The 10th of Ashoora is very virtuous. I'm going to mark it on my calendar. Oh, in Sha'ban, there's a virtuous day. I'm going to mark it on my calendar. Ramadan is a very spiritual and auspicious occasion. I'm going to mark it on my calendar. So on and so forth. This allows us to segment and divide the year in a more bite-sized, manageable fashion. That said, right now we are in Muharram, a very auspicious month in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah At-Tawbah, Allah mentions, إِنَّ عِدَّةَ الشُّهُورِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ 12 شَهْرًا. That in the count of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are 12 months. There are 12 months in the Islamic calendar. مِنْهَا أَرْبَعَةٌ حُرُمٌ. 4 of these months have a sacredness attached to them. They have an added significance and an added value. What are these 4 months? We learn from Sahih al-Bukhari, these 4 months are 3 months that are consecutive. Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, and then later on there's the Rajab. These are known as al-Ashhur al-Hurum, the 4 sanctified months, the 4 sacred months. They were even sacred pre-Islam, meaning that the polytheists in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and even before that, they would commemorate these months, and despite the wars they would have with one another, in these months they would not fight with one another. They had some moral compass that guided and informed their decisions. So Al-Ashhur al-Hurum, these 4 months, in the sight of Allah are already sacred. Even before Islam, these were sacred. So when we think of Muharram, the first thought that should come to our mind is, this is a month just like the previous and like the month before that. These are Ashhur al-Hurum. Interestingly, Ramadan is not Ashhur al-Hurum. Ramadan is not Ashhur al-Hurum. Ramadan has its virtues, but Muharram is from al-Ashhur al-Hurum. And in the month of Muharram, another added benefit is, it's the first month of the Islamic calendar, which means, like anything else, the first things that we do set the tone for everything that comes after it. Right? Let's say, for instance, a person meets a new friend, a new neighbor, a coworker. And in that first meeting, the person is very vulgar. The person is very obscene. The person is very argumentative. No matter what that person does later on, first impressions last. That first impression will be stuck in the psyche of this person that, yeah, this is not a person that I want to interact with. Likewise, the month of Muharram is the first month of the year. The actions and deeds and behavior that I typify in this month will continue to set the tone for the rest of the year. That is Muharram in general. Now, particularly in Muharram, we have a date that is extremely beneficial, and that is the day of Ashoora. Before I talk about the day of Ashoora, it's important for me to go on a tangent very quickly and mention that Muharram is, according to mainstream Islam, is definitely something of virtue, but we should realize that there are also many inappropriate and wrong actions that people do in the month of Muharram. One thing that we know is Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu was martyred in Muharram. This was the month that he was martyred in. Although we grieve, although we are upset, we're sad over his death, we make dua that Allah elevates his status. He was the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That said, we will not engage in un-Islamic behavior just to just to signify his demise. Some Muslims, what they will do is they will harm themselves, they'll beat themselves up, they will put on a show. This is not part of Islam. This is something as Muslims we should not indulge in. Rather, we take from what is established in the Quran and what is established in the Sunnah. So, Muharram has a lot of benefits, a lot of reward, a lot of significance. But that does not mean I indulge in actions that are un-Islamic. And unfortunately for many of us in many cultures, we don't know. We just hear that, oh, back at home they used to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to do it as well. We should be aware of our deen. And yes, Muharram, it's a virtuous month, but there's no specific actions besides Ashoora that we need to do. That you need to stay up and recite something particularly. You have to harm yourself. You have to cry and wail. These are not Islamic actions. That said, from the month of Muharram, one day has added significance. And that is the day of Ashoora. In Arabic, Ashar means 10. Ashoora means 10th, number 10. So it's called Ashoora because it is the 10th day of Muharram. Why is this important? We've heard this a number of times. The Prophet ﷺ, he comes to Medina. When he comes to Medina, he sees that the Jewish community is fasting. And he asks the Sahaba, okay, what inspires them to fast? They say, this is the day where Najjallahu Musa. When Musa ﷺ took the Banu Israel and they passed over the ocean as it parted to be saved from Fir'aun. When the Prophet ﷺ, he heard this, he said, نَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِمُوسَى. We are more entitled to Musa ﷺ, by virtue of which we will fast this day as well. We will fast this as well. What's fascinating about this is a perfect example of healthy competition. He's seeing that the Jewish community, they're commemorating a prophet who is very close in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in competition, he says, no, we're more entitled, so let's do something good. Oftentimes when we compete, we're not instructive, we're destructive. Somebody's doing something good, instead of me adding to it, I want to destroy it. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying, if they're fasting, we're more entitled to fast, so I'm going to fast as well. We're all going to fast. We're all going to fast. There's a very important lesson in there, how as Muslims, when we see something that other people are doing that is good, we are more entitled to that good, so we should do it as well. I'll give you an example. Let's say you move into a town. Muslims are very small in that community. And you see there is a food drive. The Christian community is getting together and they're organizing a food drive. We should say, as Muslims, my faith inspires me to do that exact same thing, so we're going to organize a food drive as well. No ill feelings, no unhealthy, critical competition. No, out of my own free will, with good sentiments, I'm going to do the same thing. I come into the masjid, I see somebody's there before me praying salah. I'm going to be inspired to pray salah. You know what, this is my local masjid. I should come before this person. Not out of negativity, but out of positivity. That is fasting on the day of Ashoora. Now, what is the reward for it? The Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Ahtasib." I am hopeful that if you fast on the day of Ashoora, Allah will forgive the sins of the previous month. I mentioned this a few days ago. Allah allows us to begin the Islamic year with a fasting that expiates the sins of the previous year. What does that mean? That means Allah is giving us an opportunity to begin the year with a clean slate. My last year, 1442, we're in 1443. 1442 may have been a disaster. I didn't do any ibadah, I didn't do anything, I was indulged in haram, I was doing wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving me an opportunity to start the year again. To start the year again with a clean slate. Sometimes a person, for whatever reason, is speeding and gets a ticket, and then points are taken off. And eventually so many points are taken off that person can't drive anymore. Now, before the guy gets behind the wheel, he's going to contact the lawyer and say, hey, you know what, can you get rid of all of these points so that I can drive with a clean slate? Just like that, when we start the wheels of our new year, we want all those points to be taken out. We want to start with a fresh slate. And fasting on the day of Ashoora is that opportunity. Why was Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam fasting? Because Musa alayhi salam is somebody near and dear to us, so why should we not fast? So it's very important for us to bear that in mind. Now, interestingly enough, the Prophet ﷺ, when he found out that this was something that the Jewish community did consistently, he didn't want there to be a resemblance. He didn't want there to be a complete conformity. He wanted to be uniquely Islamic, so he said, if I live to see next year, I will also fast the day before it, or possibly the day after it. I'm going to add another day of fasting before Ashoora, or added to Ashoora. So if I'm fasting on the 10th, let me also fast the 9th. If I'm not fasting the 9th, let me also fast the 11th. Why? Because if the Jewish community is specifically fasting the 9th and we're doing the same thing, then that shows like you're mimicking them, like a copycat. Islam is unique. Islam brings something fresh to the table. So we're going to fast a day before or add a day after. Now, interestingly, fasting of Ashoora, according to some scholars, was actually fard. Before Ramadan fasting happened, scholars mentioned that Ashoora was actually fard. And then when Ramadan was instated, then the Prophet ﷺ says, if you want, you can fast Ashoora, and if you do not want, you do not have to fast on the day of Ashoora. Now a few questions arise. We understand the virtues, the rewards of the day of Ashoora. Do I have to fast a day before and a day after? You don't have to. The scholars say it is mustahab. It is ideal you fast a day before, a day after. If you're only able to fast one day, fast on the 10th. Just fast on the 10th and that will be fine and sufficient. You don't have to do a day before, because sometimes, especially youngsters, they're discouraged. They're like, oh man, I can't fast an entire 2 days. I can't fast a day before and that day, or a day after. Is it fine if I just fast one day? If somebody says that, it's not makruh, it's fine if they just fast that one day. Ideally, they fast both days. Number two, now, this is a bit of a interesting question. When is the day of Ashoora for us? As we know, there are different ways of sighting the moon, right? There's calculation, there's global, there's local. I don't want to get into the details of, the moon sighting debate. That's not the purpose of the talk. However, the month of Muharram began differently based on calculations and is started differently based on global sighting and local sighting. Now for many people who just go online or whatever, they'll see that the 10th of Muharram is tomorrow. But according to global sighting or local sighting or whatever have you, global sighting at least, the 10th of Muharram is on Thursday. I'm not going to tell you which one to do. Whichever you're comfortable with, do it. But the beauty in Islam is, in Ashoora, we're already fasting a day before and we're fasting the day of Ashoora. So if you fast tomorrow and you fast on Thursday as well, you're going to get that reward. Regardless of which type of calendar you're following, we don't need to get into that specifics. Let's fast tomorrow and let's fast the day after that. That way, if it is tomorrow, I get the reward. If it is the day after, I get the reward. And in both scenarios, I get the reward of adding another day to Ashoora. There could be some confusion when people go online and they say, okay, when is Ashoora? Is it tomorrow? Is it the day after? Depending on where you check, it can either be tomorrow or it can be Thursday. To be on the safe side, let's fast tomorrow and let's fast the day after that as well. Now, the last point that I want to mention is there is a hadith. And this hadith is من وسع على عياله يوم عاشوراء وسع الله له سائر سنته. That whoever is generous, whoever spends on his family on the day of Ashoora, Allah will increase that person's rizq throughout the year. It should be noted that this hadith is extremely weak. This is not a sahih sanad, it's like an extremely authentic hadith. There's a lot of criticism on this hadith. That said, it does not mean I should not be generous. Despite whether the hadith is weak or not weak or it's da'if, or let's put that debate to the side. Being generous is part and parcel of my faith. And if I can give my children, my family an incentive to fast on Ashoora, then hopefully Allah will reward me for sure. I may not get that specific reward, but I hope that Allah will reward me. And my children and my family will feel more motivated of fasting. So for instance, we say we're all fasting tomorrow. For iftar, we're going to go out and eat. If it's tomorrow or the day after. Or we're all fasting tomorrow. Whoever's fasting tomorrow, inshallah, they're going to get a hadiyah at the end of the day. And something small to give it. Whoever fasts tomorrow, X, Y, and Z. It not only becomes a motivation, despite the weakness of the hadith, we're hopeful that Allah will reward us for our generosity, but it cultivates a culture of being inspired to do good deeds. So let's keep that in mind and let's bear that in mind. So in summary, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has specified for you and I different occasions throughout the year where we get closer to Him. Because we have our ups and downs. Sometimes we're really motivated, sometimes we're completely detached from the deen. Muharram is the beginning of the year. It's where we put the car into ignition and we begin our journey. Let's begin on the right footing. There's a lot of rewards of Muharram. Fasting in Muharram in general is very rewarding. But if I can't fast many of the days, at the bare minimum, let me seek out the 10th. When is the 10th? Either tomorrow or it's going to be Thursday, whichever day I'm going with. Ideally, we go with both. What's the reward that I should expect? The sins of my last year will be forgiven. And I'm starting this year with a brand new clean slate. And the most beautiful aspect of this is not only are we rewarded, we're displaying our love of the Anbiya in the past. You know, a lot of times people say, oh, Islam is this, Islam is that, Islam is anti-Semitic. People throw all these allegations about Islam. Over here, we're fasting and commemorating a day because Musa alayhi salam was saved. What better indication of our love of Musa alayhi salam can we show? We show our love for all of the Anbiya, but we're even fasting this day. So this shows a continuity in the line of prophets, that we are carrying on the message, the mission of Musa alayhi salam. And to conclude, it's very important, as I mentioned in the beginning, we may be hearing many different practices or stories in the past and see people do things in the month of Muharram. If something is not clearly established in the Quran, in the Sunnah, in the lives of the Salaf, it's highly ideal for us to avoid those things, right? We see displays of people, harming themselves and hurting themselves. Let's put that aside and let's stick to more what is authentically established in the Sunnah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspire us to benefit from these occasions throughout the year. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit from the auspicious occasion of Ashoora, to fast that day and a day before or a day after. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to get close to Musa alayhi salam, not only on the 10th of Ashoora, but allow us to emulate his lifestyle throughout our lives. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.